Good morning and good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to our second session in the IFC webinar series on employability for higher education. It's good to be with you again and to share the knowledge and experience we have accumulated through working in the space of education with universities and technical vocational institutes all over the world. Through our employability tool, we have had the privilege of assisting our clients determine where their strengths are and where they could improve when it comes to creating employable graduates. We know all participants here care deeply about their students' education and their ability to get a job. Helping students get work experience before they graduate gives them a head start with employers. The question is, how do educators engage with employers to facilitate these internships, or more broadly, work integrated learning? And how do they prepare their students to make the best out of these experiences? Our speakers from different parts of the world will share their knowledge on this important topic. Before we move on to the speakers, I'd like to encourage you all to use the Q&A box at the bottom to send in questions, as we will have a Q&A session at the end. Please note that the Q&A box is not public. It will just be the moderators, i.e. Mac and myself, who will be able to see these questions, and we will direct them to the relevant speaker. I will hand over to Mac, our IFC education specialist, who will be moderating the session today, to give us a brief introduction about the topic and an introduction of the speakers. Over to you, Mac.
Thanks, Amy, for the introduction, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Hope everyone is staying safe. My name is Mohammed. I'm an education specialist at IFC based in Washington, DC, and the moderator for today's event. The topic for which, as Amy mentioned, is when there's a will, there's a way, and exploring the value of work integrated learning. So why did we pick this topic today, and why now? So, as all of us know, we've lived through the past year with quite a bit of turmoil in our personal and professional lives. And particularly for those of us that work in higher education, we've seen the havoc that it's caused because of the pandemic. And the whole world really has been upended by this crisis, and we are learning how to cope with it and deal with it and develop new strategies. So higher education has not been immune from this, with major disruption to classes being cancelled, delays in examinations, technology not being ready to cater for the transition. But more importantly, graduation has been affected, which is really impacting the lives of young people, as they've had to either modify their plans for the job search, or delay them, or adopt alternative methods. So of course, higher education institutions are deeply conscious of this, and they're trying to put in place solutions, and some have fared better than others. But I think it just underscores and underlines for us the importance of having a plan and having a strategy. And that's why we convened this group today to talk about it under this broad rubric of work integrated learning. So we've assembled a stellar panel, and let me quickly introduce them before we get started. We have with us Dr. Norah McRae. She's the Associate Provost for Cooperative and Experiential Education at the University of Waterloo. Irina Zilbergleyt, who's the Director of Career Education and Advising at the IE Business School in Madrid, Spain. Myrza Karimov, who's the Head of Cooperative Education at the School of Arts and Sciences at the University of Central Asia in the Kyrgyz Republic. And finally, Mo Ali, Founder and CEO of Product Faculty at the Product Management Training Institute in Toronto, Canada. So welcome everybody, and we are really looking forward to a very engaging discussion. We have participants dialed in from all over the world, particularly from developing countries and emerging markets where IFC mainly operates. So with that, let's get started. And let me turn to you, Norah. You represent University of Waterloo, which is extremely well known in Canada, but maybe not as much in the rest of the world. So start off by telling us a bit about the university, and then also talk about this whole notion of work integrated learning. Why is it important, and what led Waterloo to it? Over to you, Norah.
Thank you very much, Mohammed, for that lovely introduction and for moderating this panel today. And it's an honor and a pleasure to be here, and thank you for that opportunity. The University of Waterloo is located in Canada. It's about an hour southwest of the city of Toronto, if you want to sort of place it in your geography. And it's a small to medium sized community of about 500,000 in total. And in 1957, this community decided that they wanted a new university, and they wanted a university that did things differently. And as a result, they worked with industry partners and community partners and government partners in the province, and started the University of Waterloo with work integrated learning at its heart. So the program started, and the university started with engineering and cooperative education, which is a form of work integrated learning. And I'll talk a bit more about some of that later. But basically, students do a semester of study, they do a semester of paid work, they do a semester of study, they do a semester of paid work. And by the time they graduate, and it will take them 5 years to do their engineering degree, for example, they will have six different 4-month paid work experiences that relate to their engineering degree. So they have 24 months of relevant work experience by the time they graduate. And this is how the university started. And now we do it across all of our 6 faculties. So there's engineering and math and science and environment and arts and health. And all the students are able to participate in some form of co-op or work integrated learning. And we have the largest co-op program of its kind in the world. So last year we did about 20,000 students in these experiences in 62 different countries and engaging with 7,000 to 8,000 different employers. So this is where I'm coming from, a university that has had this type of modality and integrating what students are studying, the theory that they're studying in a practical setting, and the thinking that that creates across the institution for students and also our employer partners. And this is the experience that I'm going to share a little bit with you. But in addition to my time at the University of Waterloo, I've been very involved nationally and internationally through our Canadian Association and actually through a world association called WACE. And I have seen over that time being involved with a number of organizations that there are some common features in work integrated learning, and that's what I want to speak about today. So I'm going to share a slide with you. And what I hope you are seeing now on the screen is a definition of work integrated learning that's being used. This is what the Canadian Association uses to give you a sense of the breadth of what we're talking about. So it's a model and process of experiential education. So that's the first piece. It is a type of experiential education which has deep roots, and experiential education is basically about hands-on learning and deep reflection of that learning, so that the understanding and appreciation really, it lets the students really have a deeper appreciation of their theoretical studies. So that's the first bit. And it formally and intentionally integrates a student's academic studies with learning in a workplace or practice setting. So this is another really important dimension, is that one of the underlying assumptions with work integrated learning is that it is a partnership between the academic institution and a workplace or practice setting and the student, and that the site of learning, the place of learning, is this workplace or practice setting. So there's a great deal of validity given to learning in workplaces and the importance of what can emerge. You'll see with the diagram here, these are the 9 different types of work integrated learning that we have defined and use as general categories within the Canadian context. So I've talked about cooperative education. That's the dominant form at the University of Waterloo. But there are also apprenticeships, internships, entrepreneurship. This is where a student will start their own startup, their own business. And that's categorized as work integrated learning, of course. Service learning, where a student might be, the practice setting might be an organization where they're doing community work. Field placement, applied research, mandatory professional practicum or clinical placements. This is where you'll find nursing students, social work, that kind of thing. And then a general category work experience when the others don't work. And that's to allow us as a Canadian network to find a way to talk about this across the entire system. So that is how we see work integrated learning and the different types within Canada. Now, regardless of what type or model of work integrated learning, there are some common influencers. And those common influencers are the stakeholders, which are educators and the institutions themselves, students, employers, and governments. And each of those influencers have goals or something that they're wanting from work integrated learning. So typically, educators are wanting to have students apply the theory. Institutions often use work integrated learning as a way to recruit and retain students. And during COVID, actually, many students are reporting that having the opportunity to have a break from online studies and being able to do online work, for example, because they're all working remotely, is helping them carry on with their studies in this very difficult time. Students are motivated by work integrated learning or influenced because they and their parents are wanting jobs often. And this is a very strong connector into graduate outcomes like employability. And that's often what governments are interested in, is the employability of graduates and the entrance of those graduates in labor markets and productivity of labor markets. And employers are wanting the value add that students provide because they provide a huge amount of value add in organizations. And during COVID, what we're finding is that employers who are struggling, for example, to get their processes and businesses completely online, often find that the students they bring in are able to help them do that. Almost like a reverse digital mentoring is going on during this COVID situation. So that, I'm going to stop sharing this for a minute now. Those are the common influencers, those stakeholders. And there are some common ingredients across all forms of work integrated learning. And these ingredients are part of a quality framework that actually we've published at the University of Waterloo, and you can find it on our Work Learn Institute website. But those common quality ingredients, we call them PAIR, as in the fruit, P-E-A-R. P for pedagogy. There has to be a pedagogical component. E for experience. The experience isn't good. No one's going to learn anything if it's not a meaningful and substantial experience and a positive one. A for assessment of learning, because there needs to be a link, and this is also the curricular link and the link to the pedagogy of what the learning outcomes are, and that those are assessed, and that there is demonstration that students are learning something as a result of this experience. And R is for reflection. So those are the 4 key components of all work integrated learning globally. And all work integrated learning globally has these set of influencers, and they may be different and pulling different levers depending on the context, but those are some common features that we find. And what we're experiencing through COVID, which has been very stressful, is that work integrated learning programs have shifted and have to operate differently, but they still remain extremely important, both for helping the students connect with their learning, help the students be motivated to carry on, helping our employers recover and pivot from COVID, and making sure that the talent, which is so important to all of our economies, continues to flow into the labor market. Thank you.
Thank you, Norah. And I think that's a really great introduction to this. So what I understood was, and maybe for the benefit of our participants as well, that it's an umbrella term. It embraces many components and elements which you laid out graphically in your slide. The second thing that I heard was that it's purposeful. So it's not just some random, sporadic occurrence, but it's part of some strategic intent on the part of the employer. And then the whole notion of this reverse digital mentoring, which I think just underscores how you've adapted to the crisis, and that employers as well as students are finding that even though the focus might have shifted of these co-op programs, but they've still retained the relevance even during these challenging times. And the final, I guess, and we might revisit this later if we have time, is the PAIR acronym, which I thought is fascinating because it encompasses and combines sort of the traditional notions we have of universities in terms of quality and rigor and relevance and assessment and pedagogy. So thank you very much for your, I think you've set us up well for what is going to be a very engaging discussion. So moving on from there, let's go across the Atlantic to Europe and introduce our next panelist, Irina. You know, I have personally heard of IE Business School because I've seen the rankings and I know that you're quite highly ranked, but maybe give us a brief intro to the school and then tell us in terms of what you heard from Norah, this framework that she outlined. Where does IE fit into this and how do you approach this work integrated learning?
Sure. Thank you, Mohammed, and thank you very much, Norah, for your insights. Actually, IE was founded as Instituto de Empresa, which literally translates to Institute of Companies. So we're also very proud of this partnership between the business world and our institution. We currently have over 6,000 students on campus in Madrid, and that's split roughly between 3,000 in our undergraduate university and then 3,000 in our master's programs. We are currently operating in our hybrid mode, which means that students that want to attend classes physically face-to-face are able to do so, and those that are not able to, they're able to connect into the classrooms. So building on the discussion of integrated learning types, I would like to focus on entrepreneurship and internships because those are the ones we encourage the most at IE. Most of our programs, starting from the undergraduate, have an internship and actually an entrepreneurship also built in. The structure is different and depends on the length of the program, the degree requiremement, and the student profile. So for example, for internships, our four-year undergraduates have up to 1 year where they can work and get credit for that internship. While in our master programs, because typically they are about 1 year long, our internship period lasts somewhere between 7 to 11 weeks. Generally, the internships are not mandatory. We do try to encourage our students to do them. As we already heard, a lot of our employers really focus on work experience as the primary reason why they hire graduates. So we want to make sure that it's as beneficial for the student by giving them credits. And we do apply the pair methodology that Norah mentioned in order to structure these internships. And the way it works is we basically have specific requirements that all of our students need to comply with to qualify for an internship. So initially they have to submit what we call a professional development plan. This is where they outline what is the kind of work that they'll be doing. And obviously that professional plan is going to be different in terms of getting approved for somebody that's doing an undergraduate program. So it could be a little bit more, I'd say entry level, while if it's going to be our MBA student, it's going to be higher value work. Then they do also have to go through kind of a midterm and a final review. Both of them are submitted by the student and also with the company. And the final project is often a presentation between the student, the company, and sometimes professors at the university. So we really take the time to make sure that all of the work experience that our students have is meaningful to their degree. In terms of our entrepreneurship option, it basically revolves around the IE Venture Lab experience. IE Venture Lab is IE's accelerator program that we help alumni and students take a business idea from inception to funding. Actually, the Venture Lab is open to all of our students, and we really encourage participation across different programs. So you might have somebody with a great tech background in one of our technical masters, partner up with somebody with a business background in our MBA. And I think that really forms for some really great diverse management teams. And Venture Lab instruction is based on 10 specific modules. So we have both professors and the business community that helps and gives specific feedback to the people that are in the program. And the program finale is actually very exciting. We do run what we call two IE venture days per year, where the top teams of the previous cohort get to present their idea before a jury and an audience made up of international investors and business people. And actually some of the best ideas do get funding at that time as well. This is something that we do celebrate a lot over, actually in Madrid, and we do these venture days all over the world to encourage alumni in other parts of the world to participate. In terms of what it means to be successful in both the internships and the entrepreneurship programs, it's really our work between the students and our corporate partners that makes a lot of the difference. In terms of company relationships, we work with the big brand names in tech, finance, consulting, as well as with some of the mid-sized companies and scale-ups, where oftentimes we also partner with our alumni. We find that working with our alumni at these firms is the most efficient ways to promote our programs. Who better than our alumni to appreciate the quality of our students and programs? Now, when we meet with companies in terms of business development, we do not only focus on internships, we actually focus on our overall solution for talent needs. So we focus on full-time programs as well. And the main things with internships, and I think some of you, if you do have kind of a similar program, you would agree, is just matching the times that the student is eligible to do an internships with the actual recruitment of the programs. So that sometimes actually forces us to develop the programs with an internship period that makes sense for the specific industry where we think the students are going to end up working. So in terms of the student side, we do a lot of work in order to train them for the very competitive internship processes on recruitment side. So most companies do not have an easy recruitment for interns and then a harder one for full-time roles. Oftentimes they use pretty much the same process. So we really have to make sure that our students are well prepared. So we do the classes on, for example, how to find an internship, how to pass online assessments, which is extremely important now where all of the recruitment processes have gone completely online. We also invest in technology such as VMOC, which is an AI-driven CV correction. We also have a platform for students to practice numerical tests that are also becoming pretty much a standard for most recruitment processes. And we even have a platform to do mock interviews with industry participants to kind of give that final push in terms of preparation. So I'll give you one example of how all of that plays into the curriculum. So I teach a class called How to Find an Internships with our Master in Management program. And for that class, I invite an alumni that are currently recruiting for internships. So in the, let's say, 20 minutes that it takes that alumni to present, they're able to reach a class of students that are really willing to do an internship. And for the student side, they also get this introduction from an alumni. They have a better sense exactly of the role that they will be doing. And it doesn't take any specific time out of the schedule from the student, because at the same time that they're learning, they're also getting this exposure. While sometimes doing recruitment events is something that they have to do outside of their main curriculum, which takes time out of their busy schedule. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing that. I mean, it's interesting to note that even though the process isn't mandatory, that there is so much active coaching and counseling and mentoring and hand-holding going on, like to the extent that it's spilling over into the classroom. In this class you teach, you invite alumni to come and share their experiences. That was interesting. The other insight I think that I got was this use of AI-enabled tools to drive the process. And I think the final one was that in terms of your relationship building with corporates and with employers, it's a holistic approach rather than just focus on internships in isolation. You're talking about the whole sort of talent acquisition area. So thank you very much. We might come back, if time permitting, to ask you a little more about the AI-enabled tools, because I'm sure there's a lot of interest in that amongst participants today. But thank you.
Yeah, happy to talk about that more.
Thank you. And so moving on, we are in Europe now, but we are moving further east into Central Asia, and to talk to our colleague Myrza Karimov. Now, Myrza, you work in the Kyrgyz Republic, which I'm sure for many people might be a new thing to learn about. So tell us about the University of Central Asia, and then describe. And there was just a question I saw in the chat, whether it's possible to replicate work integrated learning in a developing environment, in an emerging market. And I think we can take this opportunity through your sharing of how it's been and why you chose it, and what has been the experience so far. So over to you, Myrza.
Thank you, Mohammed. It's my pleasure to join this great team and to share our own experience from Kyrgyzstan, from the developing world. University of Central Asia is a small university, and then with also at the same time a unique university with 3 campuses in 3 different Stan countries. Our first campus we opened 2016 in small town, mountainous town in northern Kyrgyzstan. Second campus was opened 2017 in another small town in Tajikistan, in Kharok. And now we are planning to open our third campus in the third small mountains town, Tekeli, Kazakhstan. University of Central Asia is founded 2000 by the treaty, international treaty, and is supported by 3 governments, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, and the Equity and Development Network, and signed this treaty by 3 presidents and His Highness Aga Khan, and ratified in the parliaments of 3 countries and registered in New York City at UN organization. It's a unique university. And then we will have our first 60 cohort of 60 students graduating this year. And all these 60 students have co-op experience, at least 9 months. And some of them, they had more than 9 months experience, because 9 months is a mandatory experience. They have to go through this process. And why cooperative education? Cooperative education, because providing just university diploma and theoretical knowledge. Now the whole world is changing, and then employers need, that not only students with theoretical knowledge, also with some hands-on skills. And therefore, like we learned about this cooperative education from Canadian, US, and the South Korean universities. But the problem was, that none of the universities in this part of the world has experience launching similar projects. And then we did a survey, and we learned a lot about University of Waterloo, where Norah works now. But Waterloo, the size of the Waterloo is too big, and then we said, no, Waterloo, we can't take Waterloo as a, and replicate Waterloo experience. Then we found another university, University of Victoria in Canada, and then luckily Norah was working there as the head of the cooperative and the education. And I would say that Norah is our mentor, and Karimov Ramji now, who is still there at the University of Victoria. And thanks to Norah and the Karimov Ramji, we were able to launch our first pilot project, 2017, with 20 students. And it was really successful, the decision making this pilot, because we learned a lot before launching official co-op program 2018. And then by that time, I visited the University of Victoria, my staff, and Norah and Karimov visited our country, and they talked to students, our partners. Really, we learned a lot. And then this was kind of a big challenge, and we faced significant difficulties and the challenges before starting our official program, because, we had to do a lot of issues faced with the legal issues with the government, because, to get approval of the market-oriented curriculum, it took us almost 2 years fight with the Minister of Education, explaining why we need to do this kind of project, introduce this kind of curriculum. And luckily, in Kyrgyzstan, we were able to get our official license and then start this program officially. And the other issue was, working with students finding internship. And then, as mentioned my colleagues in the past, that this is kind of relationship building with companies and with public and the private organizations. And all the other challenge was kind of, bringing a new academic culture and which is changing the mindset of not only university students and faculty and staff, but also a mindset change of our employers, because according to our policy, all students who will do internship, they had to get paid by the company. And according to some legal regulations, especially in Kazakhstan, all students who work as an intern while they're at the universities, they never get any payment. Now we are changing now, but luckily in Kyrgyzstan, we can do this because Kyrgyzstan, we have more flexibility and some democracy in Kyrgyzstan than in other countries of Central Asia. And to do this, what we will do, we will first work with the policymakers, parliaments of the national level, and then we have an education committee in the parliament, and we talk to them, and we need to do this, we need to do that, and then luckily, several MPs, they are very interested in our program, and they wanted even, our students to talk in the parliament and to share their experience. But unfortunately, because of the political situation in the country, we were not able to do this. But we hope that our students will share their experience in the national parliament soon. And then the other difficulty was, also some faculty was against this, some students, why I should work during this summer vacation, and then also mindset change of the parents. Parents were against why my student, my daughter or my son should work 3 months, while other students are at home with their family and they're helping the families. But now, luckily, that this year, like many students, like senior students and junior students, most of them, they approach, then now recently we finalized the resume book of our graduate students. And I've seen this resume book, can you imagine 60 students and the page of the resume book was almost 100 pages. This is the result of the work. And then I really want, all these students to be employed, 100% employment after graduation. This is the goal of the COOP program and the work integrated program. But, yes, I would say it's replicable even in the developing countries. The only thing there should be political will, and then will of the university faculty and the strong support from the senior management and from the board. That's, I would say that I can share that this is possible. Now we will just go next year when we will do first graduation. We will apply for international accreditation of the COOP program through World Association of Cooperative Education. And since we are full member, institutional member of the World Association, and also we joined the Canadian Association of Cooperative Education.
No, thank you very much. And thank you also for comprehensively, I think you answered the question that was raised. First of all, that it's possible to replicate this in developing countries, but I think you clearly outlined the challenges. And I think the one challenge that really struck home with me is the role of the government, which we hadn't previously mentioned. And it is that government in many environments and in many jurisdictions is a key stakeholder in this, and you shouldn't ignore them. In fact, you should try to work with them and bring them on board and answer their objections and try to work with them. I think the other key stakeholder that you mentioned, which is even more critical, is faculty. Because as we know, in higher education, we refer to faculty as the academic heartland, and they truly are. They are the core of the higher education institution, and we ignore them at our peril, particularly when starting a new initiative. I can see Irina and Norah nodding their heads because I'm sure they've been through this. So that was fascinating. Thank you very much, Myrza. And so let's move on now and maybe get a slightly different perspective, because we have somebody with us who's not only an alumnus of the University of Waterloo, but is also a successful entrepreneur and has been on both sides of the fence. So as an alumnus, having experienced this, and as an employer, having recruited and mentored and coached young people. So welcome, Mo. Tell us a bit about what you do, who you are, and then talk about your experiences at Waterloo. Maybe starting off with why Waterloo, because there is a bewildering array of choices for a young person to go to university. Why did you pick Waterloo? And then subsequently describe for us what your experience was. So over to you.
Thank you, Mac. Yeah, so when I was thinking about going to university and picking schools, I was very indecisive. I actually applied to and got into 10 out of my 11 choices in universities in Canada. It was a whole range of universities from, everything from engineering programs to business programs. And what I ended up deciding to do was going to Waterloo to do the mechatronics engineering program. The mechatronics engineering program is a 5-year program that integrates 6 different co-op terms into the experience. So what I'll be sharing today will be, there's number one, the perspective of the co-op student having to do 6 co-op terms, and number 2, of the employer, because I've also hired a lot of co-op students, and what does that look like? Why do we hire from Waterloo or programs that offered cooperative learning? And I'll offer insights from both of those. So the first will be the student's perspective. Look, at the end of the day, the student is going to university to get a job, right? I mean, sure, there's other things like having a good time or experience, but at the end of the day, you want to go to university to get a full-time employment afterwards. And when you think about picking a program with cooperative education that gives you these work experiences prior to graduating, that gives you a big leg up compared to your peers, right? So at going through Waterloo's program, I got to have a wide variety of experiences. I worked at Apple in California, where I got to meet Steve Jobs. I worked at Toyota Motor Manufacturing. I worked at small companies and a whole range of companies. So it was helpful in 2 ways. Number one, it helped me to experience all these different companies. And number 2, as a student who is just starting out their journey of figuring out what they want to do in their life, it's a great way to try different roles out. So you are much more firm on what you want to do when you graduate. So from that perspective, it was great in getting me that experience, over the 5 years of my experience. Further to the first point around the student perspective, we also are asked to reflect on our experience, and we had to write a co-op term we had to write a co-op report on our experience. And these reports are, I remember they were like, 70 to 100 page reports, a lot of work, a lot of effort on every single co-op term that we did, so that we can relate academically what we're learning to what we did in our co-op term. And that report is actually marked, and so it has some weight to it. The third point from a student perspective is that the way that Waterloo made the co-op program work, there's a lot of different factors, but one of the things that I remember is that, the interview process and how the fact that you have to show up to interviews is taken very seriously. I'm not sure if things have changed, if I remember correctly, but you're able to leave class, skip class because you have an interview. You're able to reschedule an exam if you have an interview, if I remember correctly. But the point is that, look, the commitment to the employer is serious. And as a student, you have to make sure that you come to your interviews and you fulfill that requirement. So that's sort of the first aspect of it. The next aspect I want to talk about from a student perspective is, what does the career services do to help you prepare for interviews? And this is a spectrum, everything from preparing you to the hard skills to soft skills. So the University of Waterloo facilitated the entire process of job matching through their job matching portal. It had specific dates that you had to apply with. It had a matching system where you would interview and match your top companies, and then they would match you up into getting a role. On top of the actual matching system and providing the location to do interviews on site, they also help with resumes and screening. And so how do you write a good resume? How do you write a good cover letter? And on top of that, they also offered soft skills help. So, I remember going to a class on, this sounds a little strange, but like how to have good dinner etiquettes. So if you're meeting in investment banking and you have to sit in front of a big client, students who just want to eat food very quickly, but that's not the point. When you are with executives, and you have a 5-course meal, how do you actually sit with an executive? What do you talk about? Where do you keep your phone? Where do you keep your hands? And that was facilitated on site in the Cooperative Education Center. So you can see a whole spectrum of preparation from the soft skills to the hard quant skills. Now, the third perspective that I want to provide is of the employer, because I as an employer, I hired Waterloo students into the places that I was working. So what does that look like? So the first thing from an employer perspective is providing a talent pool that is very rich. So when you work with Waterloo to ask for candidates, they'll give you a lot of resumes and a whole breadth of candidates that you can hire from. And this is great because you can see people that where they've worked, what their grades are, and you can match exactly to your requirement, which is really, really helpful. The last point from an employer perspective, which was like the most valuable reason for working with universities that offer cooperative or work integrated learning, is that this is a pre-screening of talent, right? When you hire talent, it's a really expensive decision to make sure you're hiring the right people. At the end of the day, a company is just made up of people that do work, and hiring people through cooperative education means that you get to test them out. You get to have not a 1 interview or 2 interviews. You have a 4-month interview to see how they work, how they fit in the culture. Are they successful? Are they not successful? And I'm given the perspective of hiring at Loblaw Digital, which is one of Canada's largest companies, where I was a director. We pretty much hired exclusively all of our full-time new graduates. Pretty much exclusively came from a cooperative education program. People that had done previous co-op terms, because we know how these students work. They've already developed their relationships and they could hit the ground running. So I hope that was helpful in providing both a student and a employer perspective.
So thank you very much, Mo. I think that was really comprehensive and really, I think, brought some insights for people who may be thinking about a work integrated learning experience on their campus. Maybe I'll just quickly summarize the 4 or 5 things that I heard very clearly. One is this whole notion of coming back after your co-op and then putting it down in a 70 to 100-page report. I think that is just so valuable in terms of applying your practical experience and then integrating with what you're doing in the academic space. The second is the priority that the university gave to the co-op experience. And I think that's just such an important signaling mechanism to students, but also to employers. The third is, and we heard this before about the use of technology through the job matching portal and using the tools such as resume screening and so on. I think another point is that the extent to which the university went to groom you guys. Your story about dinner dinner table skills, I think it's so granular and so specific, but in the final analysis so valuable. And I think the final point was what you described in your role as an employer, is that it is such a cost-effective way of pre-screening talent and building up a pipeline, because these are people you already know. You've tested them through co-op. You know their strengths and what they are capable of. So that's fascinating. And I think the way that Norah had earlier described that they're processing 20,000 students in 62 countries. I think, Mo, you can be comfortable that they are still doing a great job and being as rigorous as they were when you were a student. But thank you very much for sharing your insights. So we have had some questions accumulating on chat, and I would like to open up the discussion a bit. One of the questions that came has been on virtual internship or virtual co-op experiences. And I want to go back to Irina because she had talked about the use of AI-enabled tools, and maybe in this context you can share on what IE has done using technology.
Sure. So I think in terms of, IE's use of technology, I'll focus both on the student side, and then I'll switch to the employer side, which I think is also really interesting. So on the student side, what we've been noticing when we do our student advising, we would repeat our message over and over again. So the same type of corrections on CVs, the same type of feedback on their personal pitch. So what we try to do with technology is essentially take those common messages and use technology to give that messages to our students. That way, when they do come back to see our advisors, they can give a more elevated message and help them kind of in a more specific way. So the tools that we use is called VMOC, and VMOC has a module for what I already mentioned, so the CV correction tool. So basically the student uploads their CV, and based on the benchmarks that we already preset and specific things that we want to see on the CV as a university, they get feedback automatically. So then they get a score from 1 to 100, letting them know that, their CV is good or bad. And then we have a minimum that we set for our students. For example, they have to reach 80% in order to see an advisor. The same type of tool we use for what we call elevator pitch practice. So they have a 3-minute recording that they do of, they basically answer a question that we see a lot on our interview processes. And then they go through the recording, they get feedback on eye contact, the words that they use, the lighting in the room. So it's really comprehensive feedback. And the same thing they do for LinkedIn, for example. So that's on the student preparation side. When we go to the employer side, and I think it's true that with COVID, there's been a lot of, just changes in the industry. Some companies are, really not doing great. Others are hiring a lot. So what we figured out is we can use a tool through LinkedIn called LinkedIn Insights and do a screening of all of the companies that are currently hiring for the roles that our students want to apply for. So, if we have a lot of business students, we're going to focus on business roles. And through Talent Insights, we can get a list of companies worldwide that are, even despite the pandemic, are now still hiring. And then we use that list for business development purposes. So we also overlay it with our alumni. And then, from that, we go in and we target the companies that are hiring despite the challenging situations right now.
Thank you. So I guess it's a combination of industry sort of standard platforms like LinkedIn and some proprietary AI tools that you have within AI. Through this combination, you are able to facilitate the services, the students rather, even during COVID times. When you said the experience in terms of companies recruiting during the pandemic has been up and down, and I think that's a good segue for my next question to Norah. And this is also a question that's come up through the chat. In terms of adapting to COVID, how have you found, what specific steps has Waterloo taken? And do you find, like Irina, that the offtake of students into co-op experiences is less, more, roughly the same? So if you could speak about that.
Yeah, thanks very much. As the rest of the world in March of 2020, we had to shift everything to online or virtual remote working for our students, our employers, and ourselves. What made that easier for us is that we had already invested significantly in a very sophisticated online platform. We already had most of our staff, or about half of our staff, were already working remotely. And so this transition happened very, very easily for us because we had that infrastructure in place. So in terms of operating the program and connecting students to employers, that went well. Now, the second part of the question, though, is about what's going on with employer demand. And what we see is, yes, initially, certainly for the first semester or two, that demand shifted. And those organizations that and industries that have a hard time adapting to COVID and COVID restrictions, of course, the demand for jobs from them is down. And I'm sure you've heard of the K recovery. So there are some industries in COVID, if you think of the letter K, that are doing fine and in fact are growing because of some of the challenges that the pandemic has provided to them. fortunately, many of those industries align with the subjects that Waterloo excels at. So computer science, mathematics, engineering, various types of engineering, as well as our arts and science and health students. And the fact that we already have many of our students already have a great deal of technology or tech training in their programming. So they're able to apply that in remote working situations. One of the things that we did right away actually in March was we have a research institute as part of my unit called the WorkLearn Institute. We immediately surveyed students as to what helped with the transition to remote working so that we could better prepare students and better prepare employers for this work situation, and received very robust responses from our students and learned a few things. One, that employers, where it was the most successful were employers, of course, that had made sure the students were set up with the technology they needed properly. Employers who made extra effort to ensure that the students felt connected to the organization and had those kind of communication channels in place. So students felt then when that was there, that they could function really very, very effectively. Young people are very adaptable. They really are. And so it really is making sure they've got the tools and they've got the supports in place and then getting out of their way. And it seems to work quite well.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, you mentioned the K-shaped recovery. That's probably helped Waterloo to a greater extent than it has helped, because I know from you know, talking to our clients across the world, some countries and some institutions have really struggled because of the kind of disciplines they offer. They have not been as conducive to the K-shaped recovery. But thank you for that. Another question we have is about aligning curriculum to employers' needs. And maybe I'll turn to Myrza, because you had talked about the role of faculty in designing this, and how you were able to overcome initial resistance and then get them to collaborate. I'm just wondering whether that collaboration extends to this aspect. Are they ready to sit down with employers and talk about their needs and maybe incorporate some of those needs into their curriculum? How has the UCA experience been on that?
Thank you, Mohammed. And that is a really good question. And then we are facing all kind of issues, but now you know that what we will do, again, we are taking some experience from University of Victoria, and then during my visit, and then even during our email communications, we asked a lot of questions. What's the role of the faculty at UVic in order to support cooperative education or work integrated learning? And then we were told, and even I met several faculty who was a kind of focal person from the faculty for the co-op department. And they were helping students and also co-op department to improve, you know, like co-op program. They were providing feedback. And as for the companies, you know, that we really, you know, that we don't take any company who wants to provide us internship for students. They should meet our requirements, because they should provide us some student evaluation forms, and they provide feedback and they review our curriculum. And after every 5 years, we will do revision of the UCA curriculum. And our employers, they will be involved in polishing and changing the curriculum. So next year we are planning to do this curriculum review, and the employers will play a key role on this. And of course, you know, that I suggest to the senior management, you know, whenever we will do new faculty recruitment, co-op team and myself, we should be also taking part in the interview process, because we should ask some specific questions to the faculty, how, in what way he or she will support co-op program if she or he will be, she will get a position at UCA.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think that's an important point, is getting employer feedback at all stages of the cycle, whether it's design or it's implementation, or when the students are back doing their academic term. We have a very quick question, and it's specifically for Irina. Somebody wants to know the name of the proprietary tool. They heard VMAC. Is that what it is?
It's VMOCK. VMOCK.
VMOCK. This is a proprietary tool, yes?
Well, it's something that anybody could purchase. So it's a third-party company that they work with many different universities. But
Okay.
yes.
Thank you. And then I'm conscious of the time, and I do want to get to Mo. But before that, I need to ask Norah, maybe one of the questions that has been floated is that, how do you create this? And I think I was thinking about that. I had a question prepared for you around that. Is that universities are complex places. They're competing priorities for funding and resources, etc. In terms of, and you have been at it so long, like you're literally the pioneers of this. So you must have a lot of experience and lessons learned. If you were to advise a new, a university or a college thinking about this in terms of strategy, structure, funding, give us the highlights of how you would do this, but briefly, please.
But in 30 seconds. Thanks, Mo. Back. I think Myrza summed it up really well, actually. You've got to have senior leadership committed to this, because it comes from the top, and that leadership will align with making sure there are proper resources. You can't develop programs like this with 5 cents. It needs to be properly resourced. So, and that comes from political will from the leadership, and they have to decide that it's an important thing to do. And in so doing, they connect with what is needed by government, and so they are being compatible with what government is desiring, and all of the stakeholders that I mentioned. What does industry need, and what do the students and the communities need around the university? And really it comes from the top. So I would say, in a nutshell, if you don't have the leadership from the institution that thinks this is a good idea, it's going to be a very difficult uphill climb.
Thank you. That's good advice. And Mo, finally, you have the final word. Thinking back now, you've exited Waterloo many years ago. You worked successfully, then you set up a successful business. Looking back, if you were to sort of think, how could I have had a better co-op experience? What could Waterloo have done better? Because this will be insightful for our participants as well to tweak the experiences of the past. What would be your 2 or 3 headline, advice points to Norah? And we'll end there.
Wow, it's a little bit of pressure. Let me think.
Sorry about putting you on the spot, but you're a Waterloo grad. You should be able to handle this.
Yeah, let me think about this. All right. One thing that I felt, a couple of things that I felt could be, so the question is, Mac, you asked me, how do you improve on one of the best co-op programs that exist? Right? So a little bit hard to do that, but the one thing I would say would be that I felt like there was, it's a two-way street. The one requirement was the co-op training that we had to, the work report that we had to do, plus the PN's training was a lot of work. So from a student perspective, if there's one thing I remember, I just feel like it was so much work doing co-op term and trying to get an outstanding evaluation, and then doing the work report, and then on top of that doing PN. It just was a little, it was a bit much. So maybe possibly reducing the work requirement there would be one. And aside from that, the other thing that I would say, and I feel like it's probably happening now more, would be to encourage more of the innovative experiences, like maybe starting your own company, or working for a newer startup. I feel that might have happened. I graduated 10 years ago, but that's what I remember at that time. It was all about the big brands. Like, I worked at Apple, I worked at Toyota, all these big companies. But I think now, obviously, 10 years later, things might be a bit different. So those are my small, minute experiences that could have made it better. Elevate the best program in the world, probably. So.
No, thank you very much. I'm sure Norah's beaming from end to end hearing that. And so not much for you to tweak there. But your point about, students gravitating towards the big brands. That's always been an issue in universities. I remember when I worked at a business school and ran career services, everybody wanted to work for the top FMCGs and the top investment banks. This startup phenomena is I think in developing countries relatively more recent, but I think it's emerging now. But anyway, on that note, we will wind up. Thank you very much for participating. I hope we were able to answer all of the questions. If not, just email us. A recording of this will be available and will be emailed to all of the participants who signed up. My grateful thanks to all of the star panelists who really made my job so easy as they narrated and shared their really deep and insightful experiences. Thank you to all wherever you are. Stay safe and have a nice day. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.